Hello students, welcome to the Recitals in-depth. Herein we will cover the international relations current affairs for April 2024, and the major themes that we will be covering are related to arms race and its geopolitical impact, climate change, migration issues, trade wars that are going between USA and China, and especially from the geopolitical angle, the China-Pakistan axis and its impact on India. So let us look at the topic. Russia fired hypersonic missiles at Kyiv. Russians have used the hypersonic missile against the Ukraine in the war recently. Now, these are the missiles which are able to fly at the speed 5 times the speed of sound or more. And this speed, this kind of high speed, makes these weapons lethal and strategic, and the countries which possesses this kind of capability attains what is normally called first strike advantage, even more than first strike advantage. And the country which possesses such capability should be able to alter the balance of power in the world. Now, altering the balance of power in the world in favor of the country which possesses this capability will mean that there will be larger geopolitical implications of it, because other countries which do not possess this kind of power will then want to have this and therefore try to alter the balance of power once again in their own favor. Right? So this can trigger basically the arms race in the world. So this kind of weapon, number one, are not available easily with every country. The reason is that since they are able to fly at the 5 times the speed of sound, that too in the atmosphere where air is present, which offers more resistance, and as a result of that resistance, the temperature that the materials of the missile should be able to withstand should be more than the 2000 degrees Celsius, right? At which even the most strongest material might melt, right? The components, the sensors and electronics of such missiles might not be able to function because the high heat they are not able to withstand. Because they throws up such technological challenges, it's not easy to develop this missile, and therefore very few countries can have the potential to develop such kind of missiles. And because of this challenges, it again leads to geopolitical consequences. So in terms of international relation, we have to understand the geopolitical consequences of such kind of development. So first of all, as I said, that hypersonic weapon is the one which should be able to fly at 5 times the speed of sound or more. But this is the minimum condition for a weapon to be qualified as a hypersonic weapon and not the sufficient condition. There is more to it, and that is that the weapon or the missile should be able to maintain such high speed even in the atmosphere. So flying at high speeds in the space where there is no resistance in the form of air is available would not mean that a weapon is a hypersonic weapon or hypersonic missile. Because intercontinental ballistic missiles are also able to fly at such high speeds, but the 90% of their trajectory is in the space and not in the atmosphere. Whereas any missile to be qualified as a hypersonic missile means that the majority of its trajectory should be in the atmosphere. They fly at a lower altitude as against the intercontinental ballistic missile. Another important characteristic of a hypersonic weapon, which gives them a first strike advantage, is that they are not easily detectable by the radar. If you see, the radar is throwing the signals or electromagnetic radiations towards the intercontinental ballistic missile, which it is able to detect here at this position. Still the missile is yet to travel such large distance. That means the defense systems can be mounted against such kind of threat because it is detected fairly early in its trajectory. So there is sufficient response and reaction time to the intercontinental ballistic missiles even if it is flying at the hypersonic speeds. But if we talk about the cruise missile or the glide missile, hypersonic glide missile, they are actually traveling in the atmosphere in the lower altitude, and therefore by the time the radar is able to detect them here, there is hardly any time for the defenses to react. There is very, very minimum reaction time. And it is this minimum reaction time which makes the defenses against them absolutely difficult to operate, right? So it is because of these important characteristics, we have the hypersonic missiles as a major balance of power altering weapon, right? So now, having understood all these things, let us now understand the important technological aspect. But for that, we have to understand the types of hypersonic missiles that are available. So largely there are two types. One is hypersonic glide weapon and other is hypersonic cruise missile. So if we talk about hypersonic glide weapon or glide vehicle, it first shoots like a intercontinental ballistic missiles into the space, and from space it glides back into the atmosphere, and in the atmosphere it is able to travel at the hypersonic speeds. So it goes into the space and then comes back into the atmosphere. Whereas the cruise missile doesn't shoots into the space, but it continue to remain in the atmosphere at the hypersonic speed, right? And it is basically at a much lower altitude than the glide weapon. That's why it is also called terrain hugging or tree top missile, right? Because it flows at a very, very low altitude. Now, another important difference between these two is this, that the hypersonic cruise missile is basically in its second stage is powered by the Scramjet engine. Now, Scramjet engine is the one which is basically the air breathing engine, right? When the missile is flowing at the hypersonic speed in the atmosphere, this second stage, this Scramjet engine triggers. And what it does, you can see this is the forward motion of the missile. Now this is air breathing. Now at the hypersonic speed, the air is going inside this inlet and it is going into the combustion chamber, right? And this air basically is very, very highly compressed air, right? Because of the hypersonic speed, the air automatically gets compressed. Since we need a huge thrust to make this missile to travel at the hypersonic speed, therefore we also need huge oxidizer. Now, to have great amount of oxidizer, we need to compress the oxygen, right? And for that we might have to carry the compressors, right? But that will enhance the payload, and because of which the payload capacity of the missile in terms of carrying weapon system might be reduced, right? So an advantage of having this kind of system is that it doesn't need an external compressor to be taken, or it doesn't need a liquid oxygen to be carried by itself. Rather, it consumes the oxygen from the air itself, compresses it by virtue of high speed, and therefore sufficient thrust is provided. Another important aspect of a hypersonic weapon, which is common to both glide and the cruise missile, is that they are able to maneuver their trajectory. They do not travel like a ballistic missile in a fixed trajectory. You can see this ballistic missile. Whereas these kind of hypersonic weapons flowing in the atmosphere are able to alter their trajectory. So they are highly maneuverable, and therefore they are able to maintain the stealthy nature, right? Whereas this intercontinental ballistic missile, once detected, will be able to predict where it is going to land, because its trajectory is predictable, right? Whereas in the case of hypersonic missile, the trajectory is not predictable, and that adds to its stealthy nature, right? Now, since it is flowing at a very, very high speed, if we talk about the cruise missile, right? It is flowing at a very high speed in the atmosphere where huge temperature will form, and because of the high temperature, the air surrounding it will ionize. And ionized air means it carries the charge, will then interfere with the electronic circuits or sensors, etc., integrated with the missile system. So this adds to the challenge of development of such kind of weapon. Because of ionizing air, its kind of impact is there, right? Then, but there is advantage of this plasma cloud, we call it. Ionizing air, basically it's the plasma that is formed. There is also advantage of it. What is the advantage? That when a radar signal is beamed at it, it's electromagnetic wave, it either absorbs that signal or blocks or reflects it, right? The moment the signal is either absorbed or reflected, it will not be detected by the radar. So it adds to the stealthy property of it. It's similar to this, that if a electromagnetic wave is emitted by the Saturn towards the Earth in the space, the ionosphere present around the Earth will reflect that electromagnetic wave back into the space, right? And therefore, we cannot hear those waves from the Earth, right? So it is the same property of having the plasma cloud around this kind of weapon while they're moving into the atmosphere, that adds to its stealthiness. And all these properties adds to the challenges which makes development of such weapons difficult, as well as provides them advantage, which basically alters the balance of power and alters the geopolitics as well. So now, having understood these things, let us come to the geopolitics and the hypersonic weapon. Since it alters the balance of power, other countries will then try to maintain the balance of power by developing this kind of technology or weapons. That's number one thing. Another way of altering or retaining or reinstating the balance of power is that they might form alliances and coalition against the country which is common enemy and which is also having this kind of capability, right? So this is what we say impact of the balance of power. Second important thing, since it gives the first strike advantage, that means there is hardly any reaction time, and if an enemy can launch large number of such missiles, then it can completely neutralizes the defense system of the opposing country, right? Because it gives the first strike advantage. So in such a case, it will also trigger the arms race in the world. That is the second geopolitical consequence. But one of the most important geopolitical consequence will be the competition for the reserves of neodymium. Now, why this is so? See, neodymium is the second most important strategic mineral ever discovered on the earth. And it is what the USA is saying, not us, right? So USA consider it as a second most strategically important mineral. And the reason why it considers is, number one, its application is vast, right? And its application in the space, in the defense technology is very, very high. Second important thing is this, that it actually is able to, or it is utilized in making of an alloy which gives the capability of withstanding the high temperature which is required in the hypersonic weapon, right? So it allows the development of alloys which can withstand temperatures even more than 2400 degrees Celsius. So therefore this critical raw material is absolute essential for the development of hypersonic missiles, right? Now, because this is so critical, therefore nations will then wants to have more of this kind of resources, right? And if we talk about USA is almost entirely dependent for this resource on the imports. Over 60% of it, USA is importing from Brazil, and around 25% it is importing from Canada. And in terms of its geographical distribution, we see more than 90%, or let's say around 90% of its supply is basically controlled by one country in the world, that is Brazil. So there are some important mines in the Brazil, which I have mentioned is Araxa and Catalão, right? These are two important mines which are controlled by one company of Brazil, which is CBMM, which controls 75% of the Brazil's overall output, right? So such is the significance of it. The number one, its availability is limited to few countries, and number two is that in 2016, China's Molybdenum Corporation Limited have actually owned important mines in Brazil. They started owning important mines in Brazil such as Chapadão and Boa Vista mines. These are two important mines. And another important fact is that by 2020, Chinese entities are basically controlling almost 26% of Brazil's niobium production, right? So 20% of the Brazil's niobium production. It has also acquired the stakes in the largest Brazilian company, this CBMM. So Chinese companies have also acquired stakes in this particular company. Not just that. Now, once China starts to control the supply, it will dictate two terms. Number one, the prices. For itself, it will get the mines at the cheaper prices relative to other country. And number two, it will also starts to get the preferential access to this, right? So even if it might not be available to other countries, Chinese will get it. And Chinese have also developed hypersonic missile, which is hypersonic glide missile and not the cruise missile, right? So we can understand how the geopolitical competition for accessing of such kind of resources will unfold in the world, be it USA, China, even the India, right? We are also in the process of developing the Scramjet engine. Already a technological demonstrated, we have already successfully tested, right? So we are also in the process of developing the hypersonic weapons. So we need this important critical mineral reserve, right? And not just that, if we talk about other strategic minerals also, so China controls over 90% of the gallium and graphite and 60% of the germanium. Now this is basically important for producing the semiconductors. So overall, if we see the Chinese design is very, very clear, their strategy is very long term, and as a response, other countries are also coming up with their own initiatives to tackle it. Okay, so now let us look at the previous year question of UPSC, which has come from this topic. So, which one of the following statements best reflects the idea behind the fractional orbital bombardment system often talked about in media? So we are talking about fractional orbital bombardment system. So if we talk about sea orbit, so let us understand. So this is basically missile moving in the space, right? So for brief time, this bombardment system should be able to move in the orbit, in a fixed orbit, right? So that's why it is fractional orbiter. It is not completing the entire orbit, but it is for a brief time, fractionally it is present in the orbit. And after that, it should come back into the atmosphere and then bomb at a specific location where it wants to. This is what fractional orbital bombardment system should be. So now you are able to understand this by your understanding of hypersonic glide vehicle. Okay. So let us look at this C statement. A missile is put into a stable orbit around the Earth and then deorbits over a target on the Earth, which is the correct answer. So for a brief time it is moving in the stable orbit. After that, certain engines are fired which deorbits it towards the target on Earth. Right? This is what fractional orbital bombardment system is. Right? Now let us understand Kinzhal and Zircon. Now Kinzhal and Zircon are the two missiles that the Russians possesses, which is hypersonic missiles. So this Kinzhal missile is the one which is basically air-launched hypersonic missile, right? And it is not a cruise missile, whereas Zircon is basically launched from the ships or the land, and this Zircon missile is a hypersonic cruise missile, and this is why this missile is very, very lethal missile, right? So this is what we have to understand from this topic, and this is what we'll have to have a depth of understanding so that the UPSC's questions, as I've shown to you, can also be tackled, right? So this topic about new national defense strategy 2024 of Australia. Now, no country's defense strategy is created in vacuum. Every country's defense strategy is outcome of its geopolitical circumstances, geopolitical context in which the country is existing, the kind of geopolitical challenges the country is facing, and the kind of limitations that the country has in terms of capabilities, and what kind of objective it seeks for itself, or how it sees its national interest and how it defines its national security, right? So before we understand the new or salient aspect of this Australia's defense strategy, we must first understand the geopolitical context and the circumstances so that we are in a position to make more sense of it. So the context goes like this, that Australia is a middle power, and being a middle power, it does not have sufficient capability to counter the superpower or the great power on its own. And in this case, the important challenger, great power challenger for Australia is China, because China's behavior in the Taiwan Strait, where Australia's trade is passing, trade relation with the Japan and South Korea, etc. are dependent. Its action in the South China Sea lacks transparency, and we don't know what is the true intention of China behind all its action. The sea lines of communication also in the future, if the Chinese dominance keep growing, might not remain free. So the freedom of trade and navigation and unimpeded commerce might be impacted. And this freedom of trade is very, very essential for country, a maritime nation such as Australia, because from all sides it is surrounded by sea, Indian and the Pacific Ocean. So Australia is the one country whose interest lies in Indo-Pacific very neatly. If we look at the geographic position of Australia, it is close to Malacca Strait, which is an important choke point. It is close to India's Andaman and Nicobar island chains, right? So its strategic location in the Indian Ocean is the one which will also dictate what kind of defense posture and what kind of defense strategy it will adopt. Being a middle power, it cannot ensure its security single-handedly. That is something we will understand. And what is the implication of it for the defense strategy, we will see. Now, USA is declining power. That's number one. Number two aspect. Number one, Australia cannot counter China on its own. It has to have alliances with others. But another great power, USA, is declining. And in future, it might not be as strong as it is today or it was yesterday. So balance of power is likely to shift more in favor of China, right? We have seen how USA had to withdraw from the Afghanistan, right? So withdrawing from Afghanistan can be seen as a one reflection as to how USA feel that it is overstretched now and it might not be able to meet the kind of security obligation that Australia wants USA to meet. That's number one thing. Its security commitment towards Australia can also not be relied upon. It is possible that USA might not service its own security commitment with respect to Australia. USA and Australia have a treaty, an alliance, which is called Australia-New Zealand-USA Alliance, right? But this is not a watertight arrangement as the NATO treaty is. Because NATO, Article 5 provides that war against one is considered war against all. It is a collective security arrangement. Whereas Article 4 of this Australia-New Zealand-US strategy and Article 3 of this strategy are very clear that whenever a territorial threat is there to either of the security partner, they will have to consult each other. This is Article 3. They will have to consult. That means there is no binding requirement. That's number one thing. Number two, that common threat under Article 4 of the treaty has to be dealt in accordance with the constitutional procedures. That means if tomorrow, when Australia is under threat and USA's Congress passes a law mandating the USA's government not to intervene, then Australia cannot do anything, right? So the security arrangement between the two countries is also not as watertight as with the NATO, right? So Australia also have this in mind. Third thing, the internal political situation inside USA. So rise of Trump, who is trying to withdraw USA from various commitments, right? USA's also, the Trump also advocated that other countries have to do more and they are free riding on the public goods in the form of security the USA is providing, right? So the rise of Trump, who has withdrawn the USA from Paris Agreement, had withdrew the USA from Trans-Pacific Partnership, or internal political situation of USA might also create this uncertainty about USA's future commitments, right? So we cannot rely USA's commitment. Now, Chinese behavior in Indo-Pacific. Now, what is Chinese true intention cannot be understood very easily. Let's say the example of Chinese research vessel. Now, China is actually mapping the seabed of the Indian Ocean through the what they call research vessel. Now, these research vessel, the kind of data they are collecting from the Indian Ocean have dual purpose. Like they collecting the data regarding the topography of the seabed, about the salinity, about the temperature of the Indian Ocean at the various places there. This kind of data is very, very important for the undersea warfare or the submarine warfare. So China is gradually taking the data from the Indian Ocean so that it is in a position to in future have a submarine warfare capability, effective capability with it. So we do not know the intention of it. Therefore, we need maritime domain awareness. And Australia alone cannot do it, right? Australia, its vast Indian Ocean, its vast Pacific Ocean. So we talk about Indo-Pacific, Australia alone, even be it India or USA alone cannot do it, right? Therefore, we need like-minded countries to cooperate. And this gives an important aspect of national security dimension to this. It also needs to mitigate future risk, right? In future, whatever risk might arise, And for that, it needs to diversify the security partners, right? Now, relying solely on USA, as I said, its commitment are questionable, or relying solely on middle powers like Japan, South Korea, will not serve the purpose, will not secure the future, right? We don't know what will unfold. So it also have to diversify security partners. So even if one is failing, two is failing, there are certain other security partners which will come into help. Another important aspect that emerges from it, that how to mitigate the future risk, that they should also become self-sufficient in terms of security, right? So they should also add to the more defense capabilities, right? So now goes the strategy. So first thing is that they have to enhance the self-reliance, because they cannot rely on others. They have to hedge against the future risk, right? So they have to self-reliant. To be self-reliant, they have to increase their defense budget. So along with the defense strategy, they have also issued an integrated investment plan for the defense, in which they are basically aiming to enhance the defense expenditure by the year 2033-34 to the 2.4% of the GDP. And in the next 10 years, they are also planning to add or commit $330 billion in the defense expenditure combined. So it is also about self-reliance. So this is how the strategy will now unfold for Australia. It also needs to cooperate with the like-minded regional powers like India and Japan in the Indo-Pacific, right? So as I said, that it's very important to have maritime domain awareness as to what is happening in the Indian Ocean, who is moving, how many submarines are going there, etc. For that, it's very important that we partner with other countries. So Indian Navy has Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region, which is there in the Gurugram, where the Australia has already deployed its liaison officer, right? So this is about what? Information fusion. That means fusing the information that is available with any partner in the world, right? So it is going to add to the more maritime domain awareness, right? Then interoperability is very, very important. When we want cooperation with the like-minded country, you are not alone sufficient to tackle the China. So you have to cooperate with other countries. For that, interoperability of the defense forces is important. How are you going to fight a war together with the other country, right? And for interoperability, one important agreement called Mutual Logistic Support Agreement has been signed already, right? It will allow Indian Navy to use Australian ports and Australian Navy to use Indian ports for the replenishment, etc. purposes, right? A 2+2 dialogue between defense and the foreign ministers of the both countries has also been started, right? And comprehensive strategic partnership has already been taken forward. Another important thing that we have to understand is that historically, Australia has talked about deterrence by denial strategy, right? This is basically deterrence by denial, and now it has moved to strategy of denial. Now understand this, what is deterrence by denial? Now deterrence means that by your capability, you're convincing your enemy that if you want to attack me, then you will have to have a cost to be faced, and that cost is actually deterring the enemy from attacking you, right? Now, enemy is attacking you for specific objective. It might be territorial, right? So deterrence by denial is that you have sufficient capability to deny the enemy attainment of its objective, right? So that's why enemy has no incentive to go out for an invasion, because enemy is assured that other country's territory cannot be taken. This is very important. This is very important in the context of India, China also, because China wants to occupy Arunachal Pradesh, right? So we have to convince by our capabilities that Chinese will not be able to hold that territory, right? Russians have invaded the Ukraine, but now Ukraine is using certain kind of missile and certain kind of guerrilla warfare, as we have also seen in the Afghanistan, that they are not able to maintain properly their territorial hold over it, right? Afghanistan, USA ultimately had to withdraw and Taliban came back, right? So going and capturing the territory is one thing and holding on to the territory is other thing, right? So this is deterrence by denial, right? But the disadvantage of this strategy is this, that in this strategy the war have to be fought in your own territory. There are other concepts of deterrence like deterrence by punishment. In this, you have sufficient power to actually counter-attack or take the war to the enemy's territory as well, right? Whenever war is fought in your own territory, irrespective of the outcome of the war, you will always lose, right? That is the important thing that we have to understand. Now, Australians have always had deterrence by denial because they do not possess the power or capability to have deterrence by punishment. They cannot directly challenge China and invade China, right? They do not have that capability, right? So therefore, they always emphasize deterrence by denial. But because of its limitation, as I said, that war will always be fought in your own territory. So you will always lose, irrespective of the outcome of the war. So they have gone for the strategy of denial. That means they will have sufficient capability to stop the invasion at a sufficient distance from your own territory. So even if you are not taking the war to the enemy's territory, you will make sure that your own country should not become the victim of war. Another important thing, that when Australians want to add to their capability and they want cooperation with like-minded country, where does Australia see India? So in the strategy itself, Australia calls India the top tier security partner. So that is the importance that Australia gives to India. And reason is that when Australia talks about securing Indo-Pacific, it is the centrality of India's geographical location in the Indian Ocean and India possessing vital island chains in the Indian Ocean, which allows India power projection capability in the form of Andaman, Nicobar and the Lakshadweep, that India automatically becomes natural partner for the Australians, right? So now we understand the significance of it. When Australians want to add to the capability, they also have to acquire cutting edge defense technology. So already they have in place the AUKUS alliance, which is Australia, UK and USA, under which they are going to pool their resources and they would they will be working in terms of R&D, development, etc. to take advantage of the economies of scale that this alliance will give to produce nuclear power submarine for the Australians, right? And it will also have cooperation in cyber, space and quantum technologies, right? So this is how we have to try and see and understand this important topic. So this topic of Basel III Endgame, this is an important topic. It's mostly there in the news. UPSC has also asked question in the previous prelims examination also on this aspect. So this mostly takes us to the banking side of it. And before we understand this Basel III Endgame, what we have to understand is the specific basics of the banking that goes into that gives us the building blocks which enables us to understand this topic. So we'll start this with the basics and then we will gradually unfold what do we mean by this end game, right? So first of all, in a banking operation, what is the objective of a bank? Banks want profit for themselves, right? Now, in order to make profit, they will either invest the money that they have, they will provide loan to the people with the money they have, right? And while they are making investments and while they are providing loans, they are taking some risk. It is possible that investment might not give the required returns. It is possible that the loans the banks are providing might not be paid back, right? So there are risks involved. And when the risks are there, then there will be losses as well, right? So banks want profit, for that they take risk. And because they take risk, they also suffer losses, right? Simple. Now having suffered losses, if the quantum of the loss is so much that the bank cannot function at all, it adds to the financial instability, not just in the country but in the entire world. We have seen the financial crisis of 2007 and 8. The banks did not having sufficient capital with them, could no longer function, right? Because if you make too much losses, then people who have actually deposit money with you wants to get your money back. How are you going to pay them back, right? So you should have sufficient capital with you which you can utilize to continue to remain solvent, right? So that is the role that is played by the bank capital. That when banks are making losses, the banking capital is the one which will allow the bank to remain solvent. Now, how much of capital is required? How much of the capital is required? So that depends on how much of the risk that the banks have taken. More the risk the banks have taken, higher the capital that the banks are required to set aside or to hold themselves. Now, before we understand this, let's understand what do we mean by the bank's capital. So bank's capital is the money from the shareholders of the bank, number one, and other investors, plus any profit that the banks have made but not paid out to the investors in the form of dividend. So banks, people have invested in the banks, their shares, the money stays with the bank. Banks make profit, but they do not distribute it as dividends among the shareholders. That also stays with the bank. That is what we call bank's capital, right? So looking at this, you can say that assets and the liabilities of the bank must be equal, right? So if we see assets of the bank, it can be loans to the customers. The loans that banks are providing is an asset. Investments that the bank is making, also an asset. And the cash that banks hold is an asset, right? And what is the liability? Loans taken by the bank, deposits from the customers is a liability, and the debt securities that it issues is also a liability, right? Then on the capital side of it, money from shareholders and retained profit, right? So now you can also define capital as equal to assets minus liability, right? So liability here is the debt liability. It is this debt liability is we are considering, right? So this is what the capital of the bank will be, right? Now we'll come to the question, how much of the capital a bank needs? Now capital that bank needs depends on the risk that it takes, right? So here the regulators will prescribe a minimum capital requirement to the bank. So in the Basel III norms, a minimum capital requirement is provided, so that other countries or the regulators of the other countries should make their banks to maintain such capital requirement. Now that actually, the more the risk the bank take, the more is the capital requirement, but the percentage is fixed. So let's say in the case of India, RBI prescribes 9% of the risk weighted assets as the minimum capital that the bank should hold, or capital adequacy ratio, right? So that means, first of all, we have to calculate the risk weighted asset, and then 9 or 10%, whatever is prescribed, that much percent of risk weighted asset will be equivalent to minimum capital requirement. Now what is risk weighted asset? Now this is important to understand. Now every asset that the bank has will have some risk. For example, bank invest in the treasury or securities of the government. Now securities of the government carries the 0% risk. So if 10 rupees are invested in the securities, then 10 into 0 will be the risk associated with it, with this asset. So 0 is the risk. Whereas if the bank provides loan to the marginal farmers or some other small and medium enterprises, this kind of lending carries more risk, right? So let's say there are 20% chances of failure. So the weightage of the risk will be 0.2. So if bank have lended 10 rupees to such risky thing, then 10 into 0.2 or the weightage is equal to 2 rupees. That means 2 rupees will be the risk weightage of that particular loan. Now then we have to sum up all this, whatever the bank has provided in the form of loan which has associated risk. So all of it we have to sum up, and that will lead us to calculate risk weighted asset, right? And then if the capital adequacy ratio is 8%, then 8% of this risk weighted asset will be the minimum total capital requirement, right? Okay, so total assets multiplied by the respective risk factors is what is risk weighted asset, right? Now Basel III, it is basically about risk management. So it provides that banks should able to actually hedge against the risk. So they should have sufficient capital against the risk, and it is how much capital that the bank should have is provided by the Basel III norms. So they will say, let's say 8% is the minimum capital that banks should have according to the risk weightage asset. Okay, so this is what the risk management and banking regulation provisions inside the Basel III, Basel II and Basel I will be there. Okay, it provides the amount of capital a bank needs to hold or set aside against the risk, right? Now when we have said risk, then we also have to understand what type of risk. So there are three types of risk that are covered here, and this is where the catch is also there, because when we talk about Basel III Endgame, that is where we have to understand. So first type of risk is credit risk. The credit risk the bank face, market risk the bank face, and the operational risk the bank face. So first of all, see the credit risk. Now to gauge the credit risk, regulators are seeking to end banks' ability to use their own internal risk models. That means if a bank has lended to a particular person, that means it is a credit risk. It might fail or it might not fail. It comes under the credit risk, right? Now how much of risk is there? So lending to a marginal farmer should carry 0.3% risk or 30% risk. Who will calculate it, right? Because it will determine the risk weighted assets, right? And risk weighted asset will determine the how much capital banks need to set aside, right? So banks always want to minimize the capital they have to set aside. Why? Because holding more capital means less profit for the bank. So they always oppose holding more capital, right? Therefore, if we allow this power to the bank to decide what is the risk that a particular loan or credit will involve, then this will lead to conflict of interest, and banks will deliberately keep the credit risk at low, so that they have to keep low capital, or they have to set aside low capital, right? And this is what the end game wants to reverse, right? So instead of allowing the banks ability to use their own internal risk models when determining how much capital should be held against the lending activities, right? This is what they want to change. They want to have a standard based on which the banks should be forced to decide the weightage of the risk. Market risk. Now, the proposal would establish new requirements for how banks gauge the risk posed by the swings in the market and potential losses from there, right? So, how to calculate market risk, that is also something going to be provided. Same is operational risk. This refers to the potential losses bank could face from unexpected sources such as failed internal policies and management mistakes, right? Let's take this example. A particular management decides to invest or hire a property for banking operation, knowing that this property might give more customers and therefore this branch that they open will have more profit. But it might not work. It might backfire as not anticipated. So this is a management mistake and it leads to operational risk, right? So all these type of risk must be defined and weightage has to be assigned, right? Okay. So Basel Committee on Banking Supervision is convened by Bank for International Settlement, right? And it is this Basel Committee on Banking Supervision which provides Basel III. It defines what is Basel I, Basel II and Basel III, how much capital has to be required, right? So it is basically a panel which is convened by Bank of International Settlement, which is based in Switzerland. Just remember it from the prelims point of view. It aims to ensure that regulators globally apply similar minimum capital standards. Why we need to have regulators across the globe have to applying similar standards? Because we have seen in the global financial crisis, if a country's banking system collapses, it have a cascading impact across the world, right? So therefore, similar kind of capital requirements have to be enforced. The committee's Basel III standard was agreed after 2007 global financial crisis. So it was after global financial crisis that the Basel III have been agreed to, right? And regulators across the world have worked for years to implement many of those standards, and the so-called endgame, which we are discussing here, Basel III Endgame, have been agreed to in 2007, and it is basically the last and the final iteration of this Basel committee, right? So that is something we have to understand because that can be an important prelims point. Now let us understand the prelims question here. Basel III Accord, or simply Basel III, often seen in news, seeks to develop national strategies for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. No. Improve banking sector's ability to deal with financial and economic stress and improved risk management. That is correct, right? So it is all about management of risk, and three types of risk: operational, market and credit risk, that I have already explained to you, right? So in this topic regarding Swiss woman bill landmark climate change case, we can relate it to the theme of climate change. But this important development is actually more than the climate change. It is also about the rights of the people, especially the elderly. Now, when we say Swiss woman winning this landmark case regarding climate change, then we have to understand that climate change is affecting the women, especially the elderly in those countries, very, very extremely. Because the heat waves will have implications for their life, right? Because these are basically Swiss country where temperatures remains quite low. So these people are not adapted to major changes in the temperature, especially the elderly people. So they might even lose their life, right? So climate change is pretty much related to right to life, which is pretty much related to human rights, right? And this is what this interdependent relation of climate change and human rights is what is basically this landmark case will involve. And why this is landmark, that is something we will see. Okay. So the European Court of Human Rights gave this judgment that Swiss government not being able to adhere to or meet the targets, the climate targets, is actually going to lead to violation of the important human rights. And since this European Court of Human Rights is an important human right court of Europe, whose judgments are binding on all its members. There are currently 46 countries which have actually ratified this Human Rights Convention of Europe, the European Convention on Human Rights. So the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, which is established under the same convention, is actually binding on all. And therefore, it can have larger repercussion for global war against the climate change. Because these countries, which are developed countries in the European nations, must accept their historical responsibility. And since it is coming from their own legal system, it is also an important win-win situation for the developing countries, which are talking about common but differentiated responsibility, which are talking about environmental and climate justice. That means cost and benefit must be fairly distributed. We cannot be made to suffer, despite the fact that historically the majority of the climate change which is we are facing is because of the developed world. So this is climate justice, right? So now, since you have contributed more, you should also pay more, right? So it is in this context you can see that this is an important win. Another important factor that we have to keep in mind, that to European court, not just the citizens of these 46 states can approach, even the non-citizens can also approach. Since they have given this an important part of the human rights, other people who are actually suffering, living in developing countries, living in small islands countries, which have always been advocating that we have to do more to tackle the climate change, can also utilize this opportunity now, right, to actually counter these countries, right? So that is very important. Okay. Now, European Court of Human Rights is an international court that interprets the European Convention on Human Rights. So for the violation of this convention, one can actually approach the court. It consists of a number of judges which is equal to the number of members of the Council of Europe. Understand this. The member of Council of Europe. Now, this actually is convention and comes under the Council of Europe, right? So there is difference between European Council, Council of European Union and Council of Europe. So not confuse this. So UPSC might play this word in these words. So instead of Council of Europe, they will give European Council. And you might see, okay, this is correct option. No, Council of Europe is different from European Council, and it is different from Council of European Union, right? Council of Europe is not a European Union body, whereas European Council is body of European Union. In this, all the head of the government of all the European Union member are party of or member of the European Council, right? Whereas in the Council of Europe, it is Council of European Union, it is also a European Union body where the individual ministers will be the member, right? So Council of Europe is not a European Union body. That is also something you have to keep in mind for the prelims examination. Okay. Now, European Court of Human Rights rules on the applications from the individual, group of individual or other contracting states. That means not necessarily from the citizens of the contracting states alone, right? Okay, so there has been rise in climate litigation all across the world. As I said, children, women, elderly are suffering. So climate litigations have also been going to the various courts in which people are demanding that that should be considered as a human right or important part of right to life. In India, we already have right to life as important part of right to clean environment, right? Right to clean environment is also an important part of right to life, right? Okay. Now, let us see this question that I have made out of this topic. So, consider the following statements with reference to the European Court of Human Rights. First of all, it is a regional human rights judicial body created under the auspices of European Council. As I said, it is Council of Europe and not European Council. European Council is the body of European Union. So that first statement becomes incorrect. Even though it's a regional human rights, it's a judicial body, but still it is not created under the auspices of European Council. Second, it lacks the power to take up a case on its own initiative. That is correct. A party affected must approach the court. It cannot on its own take up the case, right? The person submitting the complaints to it must be a citizen of a state party. No, that is what the main point is, right? It will allow even the other states, other people not belonging to state party, approach the European Court of Human Rights, right? So this is incorrect. Number 4, its judgments are legally binding on the countries concerned. Yes, its judgment have even forced other countries to actually make laws in line of the judgment of this court. So this is a correct statement. So this topic about UK passes bill to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. Okay. Now, there are issues that the UK is facing, and not just the UK, various developed countries in the European Union is facing. And this issue is not solely related to them, but it is also related to the outside, what is happening in the world outside of the Europe, right? For example, wars in Afghanistan, Syria have actually made various people homeless. People, because their economies have been devastated, now people wants to migrate to other countries from where they can live their own life. People also feel threatened at their home country, where their life is threatened. They feel the fear of prosecution, etc. Right? So it is also because of this reason that people are migrating to other countries and seeking asylum, right? And all those external factors, coupled with pull or attraction of the Western developing countries, is actually resulting in people seeking more asylum in the Western countries. So the migration is always because of two factors, push and pull factor. So push factor is because of the internal situation, economic, social and political situation of the countries from where the migrants are moving out. They are pushed out of their country because of the poverty, political instability, etc. Pull factors are because of the inequality. Some countries are more developed, they are advanced, they have better infrastructure, they have better job opportunities, etc. So naturally, people who are moving out will go to those countries which are advanced countries where they can have a better life. So these push and pull factor are combining together, making people to move towards the Europe, right? So in this, many people are moving or crossing the Mediterranean Sea from the North African countries and going into the Europe, where they reach Italy and then further into France. Having reached France, it is observed that large number of people are crossing the English Channel to reach the other side, which is the England. This is called channel crossing, and this is what UK wants to counter. Now, why the UK wants to counter this channel crossing is something that we have to understand, right? So you can see these two important tables. Here we see the asylum applications which UK is getting. This is the total asylum applications that UK is getting year by year. So we start from here 2003 to 2023, right? So this is the total asylums application. So now this year, in the year 2022, in the year 2022, around 100,000 or about 1 lakh total asylum applications have been received, right, in the UK, which is a huge number, right? But in the same year, 2022, about 45,000 have come by crossing the English Channel. So this graph depicts people crossing the English Channel in the boats, small boats, right? So you can see here this graph. This is France. So people somehow reaches the France, and from there they crosses the English Channel and reach the England, right? So if in the year 2022, 100,000 people have seek asylum in England, almost half of them, around 45,000, have come from the crossing this English Channel. And it is the blocking of people from crossing this English Channel that the UK wants to actually make sure, right? UK have already signed some agreements with some have understanding with the France, in which they have more patrolling in this English Channel, so that the smuggling gangs are not able to be successful to make people to cross this English Channel, right? But that doesn't work, right? So now UK wants to deter people from crossing the English Channel from France into England. And the reason is that UK is overwhelmed by the asylum seekers, right? And since half of them are almost coming from crossing the English Channel, is something that UK wants to block by deterring them. So what UK is doing? They're saying that if you come from these illegal, they're saying that this is the illegal path. People are traveling this dangerous English Channel, and this English Channel is very, very dangerous because this is a region where very high tides will be there, right? And therefore the crossing of this channel becomes very dangerous, right? So UK is saying if you come through this illegal channel, then you will be deported to the third country, which is Rwanda, right? And UK is hoping then, since every other method of deterring people from crossing the English Channel has failed, this particular provision, people will fear that if they cross this channel and reach England, they will be deported to Rwanda. Therefore, they might deter from crossing this English Channel, right? So if people are coming from the legal route for asylum, UK is okay with it. But they are saying that if somebody is coming from the illegal way, we are going to block. Another thing that UK is saying, that large number of people who are seeking asylum are actually not the true victim of violence. People are also seeking asylum out of the economic necessity. So they are calling it economic migrants, right? Now, there is in the international law, which we call 1951 Refugee Convention, there is a principle of non-refoulement, from where the criticism also emerged, right? So in the principle of non-refoulement, if a person comes to a country, seeks the asylum, he should not be deported back to the country where his life is threatened, right? So UK is under obligation to not deport the person where his life is threatened. So what UK is doing, it is founding a middle ground. It is saying, I'm not deporting to the country from where your life is threatened, but I'm deporting to the safe third country, which is Rwanda, right? Now if you see the criticism, Rwanda's asylum system itself is very questionable, and there is a pure human right records in Rwanda, right? So how you can say that people will be, Rwanda is a safe third country, right? So this is something that the critics of this arrangement are also basically saying. Now, so when we say that Britishers actually not wanting people to seek more asylum, and there are legitimate British concerns also in it. So let us understand some of them. In the Britain, especially after the Brexit means when the Britain quit the European Union. The important reason for Britain to quitting the European Union is to decrease the immigration flow, because being part of European Union, they were not able to stop the immigration flow, right? To decrease that, they have exited the European Union, which is called Brexit. And despite that, after Brexit, rather than fall, there is an increase in the asylum seekers. So this is an important British concern, right? Recently, Britain have already taken from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, a record number of asylum seekers as well, right? So already they are burdened. Okay. Another important thing that they are saying, that many migrants, asylum seekers, are basically economic migrants. For example, it is saying that arrival from countries such as Albania, even India, which UK categorizes as a safe country, cannot amount to be a refugee, right? These are basically economic migrants, right? In some of its concern, UK is justified. In some of its concern, UK is not justified, right? So what is the objective? Number one, that people are crossing this English Channel, which is dangerous because of the smuggling networks, smuggling gangs, which are actually pushing them, making them to move there. So it is wanting to basically crush these smuggling networks also. So this is one important reason why it is launching. Another is, I have said that it wants to deter the movement of people from the English Channel in the small boats, which is very, very dangerous. Okay. All right. Now we'll come to important aspect from the prelims examination. See, places in news, we have to understand there can be a prelims question. So now this English Channel, North Sea are there in the news. So let's know something about English Channel. So first of all, it is between England and the France. It connects North Sea with the Atlantic Ocean. And there is a strait connecting North Sea with the English Channel, which is called the Strait of Dover, right? So some important geopolitical locations that we have to know. Okay. Now there are important ports also in both sides of channel. That means in Britain and in France. There are important ports which we can call Southampton is there in the England and Le Havre is there in France. So two important ports we have to know. There might be some question on the port. So Southampton is there on the England side and Le Havre is there on the France side. There are, when we say this North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, we can also say that this is an area from where the cold current will be coming, right? And this is the area from where the warm current will be coming. So this English Channel is basically very productive for the fishing industry also, because meeting of cold and cold current make it very, very important. Here the planktons associated with both cold current as well as the warm current will be available. So for fishing industry also, it is very, very important. So this is what we have to understand for the prelims point of view in this topic. So in this topic about European Union easing the Schengen visa rules for Indians. So this is a good news for Indian. European Union had in the past had a important pact with India, which is called India-EU common agenda on migration and mobility. Now, this pact is basically about enhancing the people-to-people contact and allowing people from each other to move freely and come to visit each other, maybe for tourist purposes or for other some business purposes, etc. So it is in this context, or it is to give shape to this this pact, that the European Union have actually relaxed or eases the visa rules for India. Now, when we have to see the visa rules, first of all, we have to understand what do we mean by Schengen area. So Schengen area is the one in which the countries who are member of this Schengen area apply the common set of rules for external border controls. External border controls. So first, external border controls, they have common set of rules. All countries are bound by the same set of rules. Second, internal borders inside those countries have been, for the purpose of movement, are basically abolished. So checks on the borders within those countries are actually abolished. So people are free to move from one country to other country. This is an important arrangement for an economic community, right? So when we see economic integration, we talk about free movement of trade, right? So from one part of the country to other countries, free movement of trade is there. This is first aspect of economic integration. After that, once this free movement of trade is achieved, we go for free movement of capital. So investing from one country to other country should be able to move freely. After this also achieved, we go for free movement of people, right? So it is in this context of economic integration, the Europe has moved from free movement of trade to free movement of investment, then to free movement of people. And to execute this Schengen area, etc., have been provided, right? Now, so European Union has provided for India a system called visa cascade system. Remember this for prelims. I'll show the question that I have made on this aspect also for the prelims. So visa cascade system. Here, it is the long-term multi-entry, for the purpose of long-term multi-entry visas, right? Now, what is this? Understand this. If a particular individual have applied for 2 visas and successfully and lawfully utilized them in the past 3 years for the Schengen area, right? Then they will become eligible for a 2-year visa, or a visa which is valid for 2 years, right? So they will then become eligible for this. Now, having utilized the 2-year visa lawfully, then they will become further visa, eligible for further visa, which is applicable for 5 years. So a 5-year visa can be also provided. This is what cascading is, right? So you follow one rule, successfully implement it, you get more, and those people who are more frequently visiting Europe will get further benefit in terms of easy visa available for long stays also, right? So this is the visa cascade system that the European Union is calling, right? Now, come to the question. Consider the following statements. The Schengen area comprises 25 countries out of 27 EU countries except the Republic of Ireland and Cyprus. So there are 27 countries in European Union. Except 2 countries, Ireland and Cyprus, all are member of Schengen area. So this statement is correct. But we also have to derive one important inference from this statement, that all the European Union members are not automatically also the members of Schengen area. So there are some members who cannot be member of Schengen area despite being member of European Union. So in exam, they can ask a statement like this also, that all European Union members are members of Schengen area, which will be incorrect. In fact, it is recently in the March itself, the two European countries which were not part of the Schengen area have become member of the Schengen area. These are Romania and Bulgaria. So it is also important. These are the last two countries to join the Schengen area. Okay. All members of European Free Trade Association are also the members of Schengen area. Now, what I said, all members of European Union are not the members of Schengen area is a correct statement, right? All members of European Free Trade Association are also the member of Schengen area is also a correct statement. So European Free Trade Association has 4 members, that includes Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and all those 4 members are also part of the Schengen area. So Schengen area in total comprises 25 countries from European Union and 4 countries from European Free Trade Association, which makes the total to 29. Okay. So first statement is correct. Second statement is also correct statement. According to the newly adopted visa cascade regime for India, consider the following. It is designed to reward frequent travelers with progressively longer visa durations. That is correct. So travelers must be frequent. As I said, that in the last 3 years, at least 2 visa they have applied and they have successfully and legally utilized them. So frequent travelers is correct one. With progressively longer visa durations, that is also correct. So they are increasing the visa durations progressively. So once you exhaust the first option, you get the 2-year visa. You utilize it successfully, then you further get the 5-year visa. So it is progressively longer visa duration, which is correct. The visas under it are provided for specific purposes of travel with the provisions for right to work within the Schengen area. Understand it. Inside this particular statement, there are 2 important questions. Number 1, are the visas provided for the specific purpose travel? No, there is no specific purpose of travel. So this makes this statement incorrect. Another also, with the provisions for right to work within the Schengen area. No, there is no provisions for right to work inside the Schengen area in this visa form. Right. So this is also making this statement incorrect. Right. So first statement is correct. Second statement is incorrect. So in this topic about Pakistan's new hangor class submarines, we will see what implication it is going to have for India's national security, and how the larger China-Pakistan axis is emerging, especially against India, right? So here we have to understand, first of all, what is this hangor class submarine is. So this submarine is basically diesel electric submarine. Right. So diesel electric submarine is when it is on the surface of the water, it runs on diesel because the propulsion requires oxygen from air. Right. So when it is running on diesel, it actually charging the battery. Right. Once the batteries are charged, it moves in the sea underneath the water and stays there for some period of time. Now, it operates in the sea on batteries. That means it also makes less noise compared to operating on the diesel. So that also adds to the stealth dimension of it. Right, stealth dimension of it. Now, India also has diesel electric submarine called Kalavari. It is also a diesel electric submarine. But Pakistani submarine has one important edge. What is this? That Pakistani submarine has AIP, what is also known as air independent propulsion. That air independent propulsion means when the diesel submarine is on the surface, it is there to charge the battery, and it is on the surface because it is unable to operate on the diesel under the need, because it needs air for the purpose of propulsion, right? But the Pakistani submarine has air independent propulsion. That means it doesn't have to come to the surface for air to run the diesel, right? So underneath water itself, it can actually run on the diesel and charge its batteries, right? So that means it can stay under the water for a longer period of time. Whereas Indian Kalaveri class does not yet have air independent propulsion. But India's DRDO has already developed the air independent propulsion. And it has also signed an agreement with L&T to produce them and then thereafter fitting them with the Kalaveri class. What is the advantage? See, it will add to the endurance of the submarine, which is very, very essential, because if submarine have to come to the surface for every 2 to 3 days to charging the batteries, it will actually be easy to detect the submarine by the enemies, right? So that's why it is very important to have an air independent propulsion. There is one advantage with the air independent propulsion that the Indian Navy or the Indian DRDO has developed, that it won't have to carry the hydrogen with itself, right, which adds to the more weight, right? The hydrogen it don't have to carry, rather it have the system which will make its own hydrogen inside, right, and which will run the engine, right? So that will be beneficial for the air independent propulsion in our Kalaveri class. But another important thing that we have to understand, that Pakistan's hangor class, which is basically delivered by the China, which is Chinese submarine, is more heavier. It also not just in tonnage, but it is also bigger in size. So, but that is no good news for China. Even though India's Kalaveri class is relatively smaller, it has an advantage. It is having more maneuverability. It can also operate properly in the shallow waters, right, near the coastline. Near the coastline, mostly the waters are shallow. So that will give a more advantage to Indian submarine, because being it is relatively smaller, right? Now, so in the context of larger China-Pakistan axis, we have to discuss. So in the context of larger China-Pakistan axis is something we have to discuss, this armed cooperation between Pakistan and China. So first of all, what is the purpose of Pakistan to have this kind of submarine? Now Pakistan have also always worried about their Karachi harbor since the time of 1971 war, right? And they have, in order to secure their coastline, they want to have anti-access area denial capability. That means Indian naval ships should not be able to access their coastline because of the capabilities that they have, which is called anti-access area denial. So in this capability, submarine is a very, very important part, because submarine is obviously not the only part, there are other aspects also, but submarine is a very, very important part. And that submarine, which should also have an endurance, which can also operate under the sea for a sufficient number of time. So they want to have anti-access area denial strategy. Another important thing is that they want to monitor or surveillance on the Sir Creek area. Sir Creek area, which is also the disputed part between India and Pakistan. So these are the two important aspects that we should have first of all kept in mind. Now the larger China-Pakistan axis in this. So China is basically helping Pakistan achieve its objective. But China has one more objective in its mind, that to add to the defense capabilities of the Pakistan, China wants India to focus its all energy in the South Asian region. That India should not be able to move away into the Indian Ocean, because larger design of China is there in the Indian Ocean. So China wants India to be occupied in its neighborhood itself with the Pakistan. So that's why China is arming Pakistan. That's number one thing. Second thing, the way China is arming and assisting Pakistan is also important. For example, China has its own global navigation system as the USA has, which is called Baidu. Right? Now, China have also helped Pakistan to access the services of it. Utilizing the services of it, China will be able to not only provide the capabilities to the Pakistani missiles to launch attacks in India with precision. Because if you want to attack or launch an attack with precision, you need navigation systems help, right? It is this navigation system on which the coordinates will be fed. Coordinates of the location to be targeted has to be fed, and therefore it can actually hit the target with precision. So that is one important aspect. So this is an important security threat for us. Second important thing, that it will also enable Pakistan to collect the data regarding India's armed movement, India's location for our assets, military assets, right? They can also know that thing, and they can provide this information to the Chinese. That is one important security threat for India. Third important thing that we have to understand is that China has also provided with Pakistan active electronically scanned array radar. Now this capability given to the Pakistan will allow Pakistan to identify India's satellite in low Earth orbit, the location of India's satellite in low Earth orbit, which is which is a big security concern for us, because satellites in low Earth orbit actually are deployed for the defense purposes, and we can also by locating the position of the satellite, they can also know activities of India's space authority in terms of defense purposes, right? So that is an important disadvantage to us. Also, these radars are very strong, and they will be able to map where missile systems of India are, right? So they should be also able to locate our strategic weapons, and this information then Pakistan can provide to China. Okay, so this is how we have to understand how the Pakistan is being armed by China to the disadvantage of India. Another important thing in terms of dual use technology. Dual use tech. So there is something called computer numerical control machine. Now this is an important dual use machine. This is also banned under this is also covered, not banned, but covered under Wassenaar arrangement. Wassenaar arrangement, right? Because it's a dual use machine. Why it is dual use? It is this machine which will enable to cut into precise, cut with precision, which cutting the metal, etc., metal and alloys, etc., which can then be to make missiles, right? So China is also smuggling these CNC machine or computer numerical control machines, which is dual use. It can also be used to cut for the parts of the automobiles, but it can also be used to cut for the part of nuclear missiles, etc., nuclear weapons, etc. So this is why it is also covered under the Wassenaar arrangement. Even the United Nations Security Council, because this capability is also there with the North Korea, obviously with the blessing of China, that North Korea is also having this machine which it is using to basically make their missiles. The company which makes these machines in the North Korea is also already blacklisted by the United Nations Security Council, and it is because of the dual use technology which is already covered in the Wassenaar agreement, right? So now you understand how Pakistan is taking help from China and how this China-Pakistan axis that is emerging is going to be detrimental to India's interest in the longer run. So what India has to do is that India also has to work with the international partners in order to basically counter these moves by these two countries. India also should not solely focus on the South Asian region, because this is what China wants. India should also at the same time deploy more maritime prowess, so that we are also signaling to the China that we understand your strategy and we will not fall in the trap that you are trying to set for us.